There is wonder and adventure in the highest degree in most of the elements of this affair of being part of life in the universe.
Wonder and adventure brought a man named Karl Renborg to China in 1915. Renborg is the smartest guy you've never heard of, an explorer of lands and ideas. He was a dreamer, and China brought him a vision. The vision was good health, achieved through a simple idea. Karl Renborg was one of the fathers of the vitamin age, and his story is full of struggle, love, ruin, faith, and triumph. By the time he was finished, Renborg had created the world's best-known food supplement, one that is still used today and adds quality to the lives of millions. Now, for the first time, some 80 years later, Karl's son has come to China with his own children to find his father's story.
Yeah, Pudong is over here, and this was all open areas, I understand it.
They will walk in Karl's footsteps.
Oh, look over here, guys. Very, very similar. My father used to live here. That's my father. Is there any ghosts here?
They will see what he saw.
This must have been what it looked like when he came in. I mean, of course, he didn't see these big buildings, but probably these little guys around here, it kind of looks the same.
And Sam Renborg will better understand the man who would chase his dream at nearly any cost. Karl Franklin Renborg was born in 1887 in St. Augustine, Florida. The family relocated, first to Savannah, Georgia, and then to Huntington, Connecticut. His father, Paul, was a jeweler who traveled the East Coast. Soon, Karl got the traveling bug as well.
So he saw lots of different types of people and lots of different types of situations. And the whole family would travel together, complete with animals and the whole deal up and down the coast. So I think that sort of built in him an interest in the people and their cultures and wanting to understand them.
His curiosity seemed almost innate. He was fascinated by the world around him. As a teen, he painted trees he had seen, and then he wrote about the experience in his journal.
Today we ate lunch out on the dry grass under a pine and saw lots and lots of arbutus, but only found one that was flowered out.
Typical for any teen, there were also thoughts about girls. He set down a code of conduct, guaranteed to make the ladies swoon.
Notice details in a girl's looks, tastes, and frocks, and at some far future time, compliment her on them. Use but 2 fingers to help a lady into a car or cab, and mind, no pushing. Make up to the little sisters and all small girls. You may be able to lord it over them when they are 10 and you are 20, but someday, when they are 20 and you are 30, the tables will be turned, and they don't forget.
Karl taught himself to speed read and could consume a book a day. He had an instinct that his knowledge would someday lead him somewhere. By the time he was 20, Karl was quoting Confucius in his diary, saying,
"The expectations of life depend on diligence, and the mechanic that would perfect his work must first sharpen his tools."
One of his favorite sayings was, life is kind of like a spiral staircase, and as you go up the staircase, your vision expands, your horizon expands, and he felt the same way about knowledge. So he was interested in absorbing all this knowledge, and once you had it, then you were able to do something with it.
He spent a semester and a half at the University of South Carolina studying chemistry, biology, and acting. But the bottom line was that he was bored. Karl wanted adventure. He had always had an interest in Asia, and in 1915, he took off for China.
He was interested in Chinese culture because it was so different from the culture that he had. He loved to travel. And I think China was the furthest place away from the United States that he could go.
You remember the stories that your father told you when you were sitting on his lap, and about China, and then to actually see these places, it just brings back these memories, and it's hard to put a lot of it into words.
When Carl arrived in Shanghai, he was greeted by an intoxicating energy.
They were a mass of people swarming, the people carrying baggage, the people bringing things to restock the boats, people trying to sell goods to the foreigners arriving, people begging. So it was a completely different experience from anything Carl would have ever seen before.
Europe was engaged in World War I at the time. For Europe's rich, Shanghai was a favorite getaway, the jewel of the Orient, full of foreign intrigue and cosmopolitan ways. Many expatriates, like Carl, lived in little enclaves governed by their own law. They lived like royalty, with opulent quarters and servants. Carl, who had landed a job selling milk products for Carnation, enjoyed these luxuries too.
I think they had like 10 servants. The one that always used to tickle me was the servant who was just solely in charge of taking care of the goldfish, and they would clean the goldfish by hand in those days, and that was this person's job.
But unlike most others, he very much tried to assimilate.
Carl went out and learned Chinese, and I think it was a sign of his curiosity that he took that extra step. And he wrote Chinese, and he would speak to his Chinese employees in Chinese.
He took great trips out to the countryside. It was the adventure he had dreamed of. He also studied Chinese philosophy in his spare time. He immersed himself in history and culture.
He embraced it all. He embraced the religions. He embraced everything that he saw, and he put it into this brain of his, which kind of digested it.
Now, the old world structures of Carl's day merge with modern glass and steel.
There's 140.
142.
142.
It was in this old expatriate community where Carl lived with his first wife, Hester Hawkes. It was a place Sam wanted to find.
Look, this is very similar.
These houses coming up here, very interesting.
There it is. There it is.
Huh? Look at that roof.
The entrepreneurial spirit within Carl was excited about the prospects of selling milk. He figured it was really needed since he regularly observed evidence of calcium deficiency among the people. Unfortunately, he was finding milk to be a hard sell. What he didn't count on was that many Chinese suffered from what we now know as lactose intolerance. Milk sales slumped. As he traveled around trying to pitch milk products, Carl began to study the Chinese people. Renborg had always had acute powers of observation, and he noticed that people varied in health by region, and not necessarily by wealth. Chinese peasants who ate mostly fresh vegetables and whole grain brown rice didn't get beriberi disease. More affluent Chinese who could afford meats and husked white rice did get sick. He also observed that those eating bean sprouts were more likely to be free of scurvy. Non-sprout eaters seemed at higher risk. In Carl's day, most doctors thought that disease like beriberi and scurvy came from germs consumed with food intake. Carl began thinking that was just to the contrary. It wasn't what was in the food, it was what wasn't in the food that led to disease. Something essential to human health, he figured, was missing. He knew he'd done no scientific study of the nutrition in Chinese diets. He was also aware of the many complicating factors that might have been causing disease. For example, waste was dumped everywhere. A trip down the Grand Canal, where villagers got their water, brought him past floating animal carcasses. He learned that the poor water supply was why the Chinese prefer tea. The water is boiled. But despite all he saw, he still had the gut feeling that food was central to health.